Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Kody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Veronis, and today we have a very special guest, Michael, our cryptozoology expert at Veronis. So if you've got any security or cryptozoology related questions, Michael is here to answer them. And of course, Alex will be back next week. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Of course.
And taking some valuable time away from,
Sasquatch hunting. Yeah,
exactly.
Of course.
Exactly.
Gotta find him in the chupacabra, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know anything about that, but if you want to, you can feel free to ask Michael. And if you've got any cybersecurity related questions, you can also drop it in the chat and we will try to answer them today. So thank you to everyone who's joining us on the stream. We've got lots of stuff to cover today. And yeah, I guess we should go ahead and get started. So one of the things that was probably the first thing I noticed about Twitter this week was that there's a new policy in effect. And this is designed to prevent people from doxing others or sharing information that can lead to someone feeling threatened. Now, there's a lot of different ways you can kind of look at this, where obviously somebody should be posting like photos of someone's house or like the inside of a private business where, you're not supposed to see what's going on. But really, this rule has been misinterpreted by a lot of people. And a lot of advocates are saying, like, this is not a good thing. This actually can be abused in a variety of different ways. So the very first one I saw was this. There was an account that is just writing out old historic postcards. And the account was immediately taken down for doxing. So because it happens to include some information about a long dead person, Twitter automatically flagged it and took it down. Which is just like one of the examples of why the sort of censorship policy, which has good intentions. It's supposed to prevent people from being doxxed. It's supposed to prevent people from having their information posted, is kind of being abused. There's a lot of people also who are maybe trying to implement this rule where it might not be appropriate in order to suppress people reporting about them. Like the most recent one I could think of was J.K. Rowling getting upset that someone took a picture outside of one of her mansions that has its own Wikipedia page. This gross violation of privacy against a billionaire cannot stand, and thus, maybe Twitter would take down that post if it maybe felt like this poor billionaire wasn't able to take the time to hire, Blackwater to provide security if she really wanted it. But this sort of policy really. It can be interpreted however, if reporters are trying to put out information that's of public interest, if someone records like a fight on an airplane, like does that violate this policy?
Right. I was thinking too, like whistleblowers, right? If someone's trying to report some egregious activity that they think the public would want to know about at a business, I guess I can see Twitter's point that they would be like breaching the rights of that business, but also at the same time, they're trying to do good. So, like, how are you going to weigh those scales? And is Twitter the person to do that? Or should that be left to the judicial system where there's already processes in place for these sorts of things?
Yeah, but they're very slow.
Right, mind you.
Yeah, so, like, there's lots of, like, things that in the past, police have abused DMCA by playing copyrighted music in order to make sure that people couldn't share certain videos online. I have to wonder if now, people are just going to shout out their home address while they're misbehaving in public. And then maybe that's enough that Twitter would be like, oh, well, we don't want that person's address to be public, so let's take it down. And then maybe that wouldn't be able to be shared. Kind of a loose example, but you can see why these sorts of policies, when they're implemented by social media companies, can really cause a lot of confusion and potentially abuse. So kind of a hilarious reason for this account to be locked. But yeah, this is a new policy. You probably will see it popping up again in the future. And because of the ways it can be interpreted and even abused, it's an interesting policy for sure on the way that Twitter is taking down information that might be perceived as personal or private information. Never really been done before. So it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how this rolls out.
Yeah, and definitely like private information seems very nebulous to me. I would want a much cleaner definition of what, because like you were saying with J.K. Rowling, it's like, taking a picture of outside of a house doesn't seem like private information to me, especially if the address is publicly known. But yeah,
guess we'll see. Yeah, interesting changes in policy. All right, so Michael, do you know Archive Team?
No, I'm not quite familiar with that.
Archive Team is the team behind like the Wayback Machine.
Oh, okay.
And, like, archive.org. So this is just another interesting project of scooping up FTP sites. So being able to download like as much information and preserve it as possible Just like a really interesting project I wanted to kind of shout out because it's really interesting to think of the fact that there's so much information on the internet that's being preserved with the archive.org project, and that FTP websites could be one of them.
Well, that's something I wonder about a lot is like how much information is lost every day by just websites going offline and then having never been stored. Because like, I bookmark a lot of stuff and I'll go back to my bookmark sometimes and just be like, this website isn't here, go to the Wayback Machine, it's not there. I'm like, how much of the internet is being deleted every day?
Yeah, and this is just a good example of how there's lots of stuff out there that is changing, but is being archived. So if there's an FTP website that has some juicy information that then, subsequently gets taken down or deleted, the fact that these activists are downloading it and preserving it is really cool. So just a shout out to them, because a lot of people don't realize how the internet is being archived every day, and it's really cool that these people are setting out to make sure we have some record of our current internet as things change.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's all I got for that one, though. And then this was an interesting note. There's a lot of cybersecurity legislation going through Congress. So there's a lot of stuff in the workforce, a lot with capacity building, funding, and risk assessment. But you can see there's 41 bills aimed at workforce, like expanding cybersecurity workforce, capacity building. So that's advancing cybersecurity capabilities. That's 76 bills. 58 towards allocating funding towards cybersecurity. 102 creating a risk assessment framework. Being able to have government agencies all work together, or like be able to assess risk with a common frame. And then also 65 bills updating the federal organization structure when it comes to cybersecurity, position terms, establishing programs and agencies. So that is a lot. People might not realize how much legislation is currently going through the government that's specifically related to cybersecurity. So if you're interested in reading more about some of these changes, then you should definitely check it out. Again, a pretty good list of the different bills that are being addressed here, or at least the number of bills, so you can take the information a little bit further if you're interested. But there's always changes coming out to the legal landscape of cybersecurity, and watching them go through Congress so quickly is exciting, but also a little scary.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is like I'm really glad to see a bunch of bills and stuff finally being worked on. Although sometimes I grow a little concerned when I see Congress people like not understand basic concepts of like what the internet is in hearings. I'm like, are you actually making bills that are going to be for the better? Or are you just like making rash judgments based on half understood things?
Yeah, and sometimes people get mad and they try to do stuff like hacking back, or like some of the other things that like real cybersecurity people are like, you shouldn't do that. Like you shouldn't give like a private company a mandate to like hack people back, like just because they make an assignment. There are certain things where people suggest it and it sounds good maybe when they're mad. But then when it's out there in the world and companies are like, wait, like I can just hack a company I think is bad because I've branded them that way. I don't know. It just seems like maybe some of these steps like could be a little bit much, but we'll see. We'll see. All right, moving on. We have the Veronis MFA Bypass.
Oh,
Michael,
yes.
do you remember this?
Yes, it is a MFA bypass, and it's actually pretty straightforward. Basically, when you're logging in, when you get to like the two-factor stage, there's an exposed API endpoint to unenroll you, but it takes place before you actually confirm all the two-factor stuff. So an attacker could, in theory, gather your credentials through some method, say phishing or something like that, and then input it and then turn off your two-factor while it's being asked for two-factor, which is kind of spooky. But thankfully it is fixed now. Thanks to all the reporting of the Threat Labs team.
Veronis security team.
Yeah,
so the Veronis research team was doing some research into API endpoints, and this is something that is very relevant when it comes to cloud stuff. Now, a lot of people have moved to the cloud for a variety of different reasons, and they just assume that it's locked down, and if they follow best practices like having multi-factor authentication set up, then they should be protected against most types of phishing and then having their credentials leaked. So let's say there's a box breach, and the credentials are just leaked out there. Even if they're using strong, unique passwords, this is still a problem if somebody can break into the account. But theoretically, if you enroll with something like Google Authenticator, then you would need to get that person's phone and actually get in there and get that one-time password in order to get in, unless there's a problem like this. So what was interesting about this is that Yeah, as Michael said, once you log in with the stolen credentials, you get access to elevated privileges. You shouldn't, because you haven't provided all the information necessary to validate that you are who you say you are. But unfortunately, the way this was configured allowed an attacker to take stolen credentials, partially log in, and then use the API endpoint to just unenroll from multi-factor authentication. So once you're logged in, you can just turn off the security that's preventing you from getting into the rest of the account and just proceed at your own pace.
Yeah, like that's what's really concerning about this to me is, I obviously I'm glad like Box fixed it, but it makes me wonder like how many other platforms have made it, because it seems like from an API perspective, it's pretty simple like mistake in configuration to make, where it's like, okay, well you let the user, enable two-factor, and then the way you handled that treats them as if they're logged in already, but you just don't let them pass a certain page. And I can imagine multiple other websites maybe naively doing a similar thing. So it'll be interesting to see if any other security researchers find similar vulnerabilities in other websites.
Yeah, if you like APIs and you like bug bounties, then we actually reported this one through, I think, BugCrowd. I think BugCrowd, and I think Tall got paid for this, which is awesome.
That's what I understand.
And again, this is really spooky because often security in the cloud is kind of assumed to be great on the side of the person whose product you're using, but that's not always the case. And I can guarantee you that there are other MFA bypass exploits like this that are out there for other cloud providers. So, just be aware that, this is something that can happen, and being protected by MFA isn't always an end-all way to make sure you don't get breached, because if a hacker was aware of this, they could have gotten into your Box account and you really would not have known. So super, super cool. Again, endpoint security with clouds is tricky stuff. So if you're a security researcher and you're looking for greener pastures to go poking around and find some really juicy, interesting vulnerabilities, this is one of my favorite ones we found recently.
Yeah, honestly, I've always found that reverse engineering APIs can be a really juicy area, especially like when you're dealing with apps and stuff like that. So many developers just like assume that it's not going to be like look through, I guess, or something like that. So they have a tendency to leave just holes where they weren't thinking about it as a vulnerability.
Yeah, so if you want to see the attack in action, we actually have a screen recording of an attacker, our security researcher, but a simulated attacker going through and doing this. And you can check this out on the link here. And guess what, you guys? I narrate this. It's like I've been called in to do a nature documentary. It's so cool. So yeah, so I narrated this this attack flow. I'm not the one who found it, but I did get to report it, and that's pretty cool. So if you want to see more about it, you can check out the site here, Bypassing Box's time-based one-time password MFA. And again, this is really cool because it's supposed to be really super hard to get around MFA, and this was decidedly not. So very, very cool find by the Veronis research team. All right, you got some ransomware stuff?
Yeah, I have some ransomware
Let's talk about some ransomware stuff.
So a certain car company got breached by some ransomware. I forget, but basically a bunch of their R&D stuff got leaked. I think it was Kody ransomware? No, it's Snatch ransomware. Got them, and they leaked some of their information. It'll be really interesting to see, because that's always my concern when I see like these hardware companies' R&D data leaked, is like, oh, does that mean that some other hacker is going to come along and use that information to do some kind of hack? Because like, especially with how intelligent cars are getting, it would be very spooky if a hacker were to take some of that R&D data and like turn your car into a tracker, or like make it do some crazy stuff, right? But also, that's not the only interesting ransomware stuff that's been going on. Australia, the land down under, is having a lot of problems with ransomware lately. Apparently, okay, this one I think is the Kody ransomware one. But basically, their government database in southern Australia got breached, and it's approximately 80,000 people that work for the government got all kinds of fun data leaked, including like their tax file number, which I guess is their equivalent of the social security number, bank details. That seems like something I want the darknet to have, right? Tax withheld and all kinds of delicate financial information. But this breach wasn't the only one. Yeah, this was the one that was Kody ransomware. Kody has apparently been attacking a lot of institutions throughout Australia recently, and it has caused the government to issue a bunch of warnings over these attacks. So if you are in Australia or do business with a business based in Australia, I would definitely be on the lookout for some of these ransomware attacks. And there is a page here I can link to in the chat in a second. But it talks about a lot of the identifiers for Kody ransomware currently. And then it also talks about mitigations. Honestly, a lot of the mitigations are stuff that you should already be doing anyway, like using a strong password, two-factor authentication, and things like that. But definitely worth checking out. And good general advice on staying safe from ransomware. How about you?
All right, so over on my screen, we've got an interesting report by Microsoft about Nickel, which is a Chinese-based nation-state actor that has been going after various organizations in Latin America and Europe. So this is an interesting look into what a nation-state style campaign looks like, what they're doing, what kind of things they're attacking, and the way that they're moving across networks. So you can see Microsoft really went all out to provide data about where this organization is targeting and then the kinds of things that they're doing once they get in. So if you're interested in seeing a pretty advanced nation-state attack against a variety of different companies, the way that they do this is really interesting, very sophisticated, and this write-up is really detailed. So they go through some of the observed activity. They see exactly what this group has done in the past and what they're currently doing in order to exploit computers and get elevated privileges, and also the kinds of things that they're logging into. So this is a lot of internet-facing email accounts that they're using stolen credentials to log into, and then get more information to proceed with doing surveillance and sort of a recon around the network to see what they've broken into and whether or not it's worth it to put a bunch of more effort into it. You can also see they've even gone through the trouble of finding out when these threat actors are logging in to roughly figure out the times when it's likely to be looking for the sort of access that wouldn't be authorized, but probably would be a bunch of, Chinese military people. So if you want to find indicators of compromise, recommended defenses, and other tools that will help you be able to find out if you are one of the victims, you can see some of the weird domains that it connects back to, like cumberbat.com
Okay.
or beeswiserdog.com. So if your computer's trying to go to cumberbat.com, you got to call the cybersecurity police because something serious is
So
going
just
on.
throw all these websites on your DNS blacklist, basically.
Yeah, you probably, unless you're trying to look up pipcake, then you probably don't want your computer connecting back to it if it is in fact a a Chinese hacking group. It's, wow, squarespacenow.com. It's funny how some of these, emulate the kind of traffic you would expect to see on a normal network, but then they just have one or two words that are a little bit different, like popularservicecenter.com.
That seems suspicious to me, honestly.
Yeah. So, of course, you can take a look at some of these SHA hashes, or you can take a look at some of these domain names that have been indicated to be malicious. There's also some detections on antivirus, if you happen to see some of the payloads that are dropped. But this is a very sophisticated threat actor, so there's lots of information to go on here if you want to learn more about the ways that these advanced groups take advantage of the flaws they find and how they go very low and slow and try to, first of all, maximize the amount of reconnaissance they get and maximize the impact they can have when they choose to finally strike. So Nickel, very interesting group, lots of information here, and if you want to see more about the write-up that Microsoft did, then check out this link to learn more.
And speaking of sophisticated, we have this year's most sophisticated ransomware, apparently.
Okay.
At least according to Bleeping Computer.
What makes it so sophisticated?
Well, okay, so first it's called Black Cat, and from my understanding, there's a lot here, but one of the things... or one of the problems that ransomwares have is, obviously they get downloaded to virus reporting websites and then shared around, and everyone can analyze them. And one of the things they can analyze is the chat basically between the ransomware operator and the people they're ransoming and interfere with notes negotiations. So one thing this ransomware does is it allows a unique access token to be run every time a new instance of the ransomware is operated or ran. So that way all that chat is encrypted, and no one can jump in and interfere with their negotiations.
Interesting.
It's also capable of killing virtual machines. I would be interested in hearing more details about exactly how that does but that could be potentially very troublesome, because I know one of the main ways of looking and analyzing these ransomwares is you sandbox them, run them in a virtual machine of some sort. If it has the capability to break out of certain virtual machines, that could be definitely a scary thing to have going on.
Yeah, and if you're a nerd also, you might be interested that this malware uses Rust.
Oh, yes.
Which is interesting. There's not a lot of malware out there that uses Rust, but it's memory safe. There's lots of reasons why people like it. So it's interesting to see that this is a piece of malware that is using Rust and is targeting lots of different platforms, including, I think, Ubuntu was on the list of different platforms that this ransomware targets, which is kind of interesting.
Let's see. Go back to your screen.
All right. So this is probably the biggest story of the week. So there is a Log4Shell vulnerability that is an absolute nightmare for companies trying to remediate this. Everyone from Minecraft to very, very big businesses have been hit with this vulnerability. So let's go ahead and explore it. This is a 0-day remote command injection for Log4j2, a popular Java logging package, and this. Oh, it sucks. It basically runs in so many different services. Let's see, Steam, Apple iCloud, Minecraft. There's lots of different things that will use this as a logging tool. And the problem here is the only thing you really need to do in order to trigger this remote command injection is be able to inject a text string into a log. Not that hard. So if there's logging going on, and you know how to make the logging engine include this string into the log, it will automatically exploit it. Again, there's no stable patch that's currently been developed for this, at least that I've seen. Although there are some workarounds that are being implemented. This is going to be a ton of work to fix.
So basically, just mash keys until you generate an error, and then input that.
No.
Okay.
This is a very specific. String that causes the logging engine to just allow you to just put whatever you want in terms of code into what's being run. So you can see this is an example piece of vulnerable code. And if you want to reproduce this locally, it's not that hard. There's already some proof of concepts out there to show off how this works. But this is a big deal. There's lots of different services that are using this logging engine, and it's important that you take a look and find out whether or not yours is vulnerable and if there is a patch. Again, this was just yesterday that this was coming out, and there was no stable patch. I'm hoping maybe there is one today. But the Log4Shell vulnerability is going to be around for a while, and a lot of different services are going to be affected by it. So really interesting piece of news. And again, this is just a logging engine that runs in the background of tons of different services, and that is the problem here. So again, if you want to go get some Minecraft points, now's the time to do it, because it looks like they're still trying to patch their stuff.
Wow.
And this is an ongoing issue. So really interesting, and expect it. Oh yeah, Minecraft rushes out patch for critical Log4j vulnerability. Yeah, so
you want to protect your blocks,
Exactly. They gotta make sure all their blocks are secure. So people are rushing to put out a patch for this, and again, there's not really a stable one at the moment. But attackers are already scanning the internet for vulnerable systems, which is a very bad sign. And another note is anybody using Apache struts is also likely vulnerable, which is a very, very, very popular thing to be using. So this is a breach that was also very similar to the one that was exploited in the Equifax data breach. So some pretty serious precedents here for the way that these exploits can be used against the companies that are vulnerable to them. So, whoops. And then, how about some data breaches? We haven't talked about distributed denial of secrets in a good, 3
week or
weeks.
two.
Yeah. So it looks like their latest trick has been releasing 450 gigabytes of files and emails from Petroworks, which is drilling services for companies like Chevron, Halliburton, and other oil companies. So if you're interested in, what's going on in the oil industry nowadays, you could go ahead and find that out pretty easily, especially if you're a journalist or somebody else who is going to be using this for press-related stuff. This is a great resource for being able to dig into documents that are breached or leaked.
It's also amazing to me that it's it's never like a trivial amount of data. It's always like half a terabyte.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the last data breach we talked about from distributed denial of secrets was the helicopter footage.
Yeah.
So they obtained a bunch of like helicopter, like very, very like detailed like footage of surveillance, and that caused a big debate. I anticipate that depending on what is inside these files, you can probably expect that we're going to get some debate about this as well, as people and especially journalists dig into the data and try to learn more about what's going on in the oil industry. So.
Yeah.
Global warming, lots of things could come out from these documents. And while I don't personally have time to sift through 450 gigabytes of petroleum email data, I'm sure someone else does. So we'll see what the fallout from this breach is in the future. Although, again, I have no idea how this happened because they haven't disclosed that.
Yeah.
All right, so another, I love hacking routers, but a recent article was going through some popular routers that have some pretty serious security holes, and a lot of the time these holes will be things that make them vulnerable to becoming, a victim of a botnet and becoming part of the Mirai botnet or some other botnet that just wants to use the router's networking capabilities in order to launch attacks whenever the threat actor decides it's time. So. This is a good article to go through if you want to just like make sure that your network-facing stuff is not vulnerable and isn't searchable on the internet. Like the worst possible thing is having some sort of like remote command injection that can be scanned for, so these botnet actors can just basically create automated code to go out, find vulnerable routers. So a nice little reminder of the fact that these things can still be vulnerable, and if you want to go through and check to make sure, for example, that your default credentials aren't the exact same that the manufacturer set, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I was going to say, that is my biggest pet peeve. For the love of God, please just change the default router admin access. If it's admin or admin no password or admin root, you're just asking for a breach.
Yeah, absolutely. Please. Yeah, so keep in mind that IoT devices, especially routers, are often extremely common targets because they're so useful in a botnet. If you can attack them, then you get this internet-facing device that's remotely accessible that can route lots of traffic. That is ideal for a botnet operator. So secure your routers and just be aware that they are definitely a target.
Absolutely.
So we talk a lot about privacy and location data stuff, but really the kind of dark side of this is where the data goes after it's collected. So obviously your phone collects a bunch of information about you, and obviously some apps have more access to that than others. But Life 360, apparently, which is a family safety app that a lot of people will install to keep tabs on their family, apparently sells that information to lots of data brokers, XMobile, Safeguard, Qubit. So these are things that you don't sign up to maybe have like your child's location sold to some third-party provider who then sells it to someone else, who then sells it to someone else. This is one of the examples of how when your data leaves your phone, you don't really know exactly who's going to end up with it or what they are going to do with it. And these companies are finding that it is extremely profitable to resell your data for companies who want to maybe sell it to law enforcement or military intelligence or some other use that you probably didn't sign up for when you downloaded the Life 360 app.
Yeah, I was going to say that's definitely one of those like tricky terms things, because I imagine it's people think, oh, hey, I'm just giving this app permission to use my location. And if they're paying for this service, then why would they ever imagine that they're also going to sell their data to someone else? Like that seems like double dipping as well. Especially like if I'm paying for this app, then not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, so you're paying for the app. It's supposed to keep track of your children, but actually the company who is providing it is making money on selling the location data of your children, along with whatever else it happens to suck up, to whoever wants it, basically. And this is a giant driver of profit for these companies that hoard data about customers, because they can either sit there and just have the data, or they could turn around and sell it to 15 people and make a lot of money on the information that you're providing to them. So it's pretty confusing to know that when you sign up for one of these services, it could be attached to many other businesses that have some sort of relationship with them that are purchasing information. Let's see, it looks like the CDC was importing some of this data, and it's impossible to know where this
Yeah.
data is going to end up as soon as it leaves the company who's gathering it and they start selling it to other people. Because once it ends up in the hands of another company, you have no idea what their privacy policy is or who they sell to or what their specialty is or what they're processing the data for. And frankly, they don't really need to tell you by most of the legal frameworks that we have in the United States.
Isn't like GDPR supposed to protect against these sorts of things? But I guess if this is U.S. based.
Yeah, this is U.S. based. So GDPR does not apply here, at least unless it's like European customers. But yeah, it's just creepy. So if you don't know about the pipeline of data that comes from these apps that makes a lot of people a lot of money, you should definitely look into it, because some of these apps have very shady practices when it comes to who they'll provide your location data to and what they will allow other people to use it for. Yeah, I really don't like the fact that this company that's supposed to be for like public safety ends up getting in trouble for all sorts of stuff. Like this high-ranking Catholic priest that resigned after he was outed by location data from the gay dating app Grindr. The data was obtained by an unknown vendor, and the report claimed to show that the priest was a frequent of gay bars. Just another example of how using an application that's collecting your data and then selling it to a third party could be extremely problematic based on whatever your lifestyle is. So just a kind of an edge case there, but really like this is a threat to anybody who doesn't know that their location data is very often being sold or marketed as something that other people can just use to power their own business. And lots of these intermediaries that offer an application that's maybe free or really cheap, the thing that they're not telling you is the way that they earn their money is by some other completely different arrangement with your data. So, keep that in mind. When you install these programs, you never know where the data is going to go, and you certainly can't get them back. And I'm sure this priest is probably very much recommending not disabling location services when logging in.
That's wild.
Yeah. All right, what do you got?
Okay, so slightly less wild, and I mean more par for the course. Emotet has started using Cobalt Strike for some of its ransomware attacks. So if you're not familiar with Emotet, then basically it's like a sort of phishing email thing. It's MO most of the time, and it'll use TrickBot or QBot Trojans in infected documents. But it has now started using Cobalt Strike. So
oh, great.
even something more you need to watch out for. And like I said, it's par for the course. Like a lot of the times with these ransomwares, like this is just a natural evolution where they're using newer methods or more effective methods to attempt to breach more companies. But yeah, that's all I got on that point.
All right. So there's an idea that I had a long time ago that I scrapped for just being like kind of unethical. And if you're not familiar with Wiggle Wi-Fi, it's a really awesome application you can use to basically walk around and record the location of different signals. So that could be Wi-Fi signals, it could be Bluetooth signals, but that data is very interesting for a variety of reasons. Now, big companies like Google or Apple will collect this data in order to provide something called AGPS or assisted GPS, where they will use the location of static Wi-Fi networks to determine where you are if the GPS position that you're getting from a satellite is slow or inaccurate or bouncing off a bunch of buildings. This is very frequently used in like downtowns of cities and things like that, where it's difficult to get a good GPS fix. However, that data can also be used by other entities. And if you were to have a network of people whose phones are out there scanning around and collecting this information, you would very quickly be able to build a database of where things like vehicles were by their Bluetooth stereo, or where people are by their Bluetooth headphones. And some of this information can be used to do a lot of signals intelligence and track people very precisely. So that is exactly what this company did. There's a military link company called Premise Data that's using a variety of contributors to record information about selected areas and then processing that and trying to turn it into something like Wiggle Wi-Fi, but for users who are looking to identify the location of different devices. Now, this could work against anything from like police body cameras that broadcast on Bluetooth, or again, headphones or car stereos. It really allows a lot of sophisticated surveillance, provided you have enough nodes in the network collecting information. That seems to be exactly what this company is trying to do. So very, very creepy, actually, to think that there could be like a private group that is using phones as sensors to basically figure out where you're going and where you've been. and selling that information to who knows. It looks like the military is linked to this. So having people in various areas acting as sensor nodes for like a larger organization that's trying to sniff devices and figure out where they are is obviously a pretty big threat to privacy, because we've already had issues where phones now have to like randomize their MAC address in order to prevent this sort of tracking, because it was so pervasive from manufacturers and other or like stores who want to track you from store to store, find out what you buy, and create a profile about you. So this has been a cat and mouse game for a long time between developers who want to keep smartphones private and make them a little bit more difficult to track, and then people who really, really want to track them. And this seems like a kind of sinister development, honestly, in having a distributed group of nodes all around you that are constantly logging data that you never know who's doing it, because this is just like some random group of people collecting it. So obviously, like collecting this sort of information for things like assisted GPS like has a pretty clear and stated purpose, but just gathering lots of location data about wireless devices and feeding it into a big military linked database seems a little bit more sketchy. So if you want to learn more about this, you can check out the article. But really here, the problem is if you're logging the location of all Bluetooth devices around you and they're sufficiently unique, you can really start to infer where people are going, where they're traveling, who they're traveling with. This sort of stuff, as we increase the amount of devices around us that have Bluetooth or other trackable technology, is going to be used to track people. And it looks like that's already happening.
Well, and also kind of along those lines, I think the growing prevalence of cheap SDRs, like the RTL SDR dongle, make signals intelligence like that pretty easy, because like a RTL SDR dongle is like $20, $30. And I have already seen multiple projects out there which attempt to incentivize people to install these SDRs as just purely listening stations, basically, and then make them publicly available.
Yeah, so this company has been used to gauge the effectiveness of U.S. information operations, scout and map out key social structures such as mosques, banks, and internet cafes, and covertly monitor cell tower and Wi-Fi signals in a 100 square kilometer area. This is like military surveillance tech that's been used in, by the Air Force and the Army in Afghanistan. So isn't that great that it's come home and now you get to deal with this sort of technology yourself? Of course, these companies are saying they're using it to like gauge public sentiment and all this other stuff, but really it's you can use it to gauge whatever you want, like, because you're getting very precise like wireless signal data about lots and lots of people, and the more information you get, the more you can infer about movements and individuals. It's sketchy. It's sketchy. And Michael was saying like software-defined radio. You don't need that. You do not need that. That's like above and beyond what this is. This is literally cell phones being turned into surveillance platforms. And the problem here isn't some sketchy device with a bunch of antennas sticking out of it that's obvious. It's some guy sitting next to you on their phone. Because that phone itself is the surveillance tool when it's combined with lots and lots of other phones all sharing data.
Are most phones capable of monitor mode and stuff like that, or is it just pure like normal Wi-Fi scanning like Wiggle Wi-Fi does?
So monitor mode refers to a specific mode where a device is able to read and decode packets that are sent in an area that aren't even aren't even destined for that device. And in this case, that wouldn't be necessary.
Okay.
You don't need a device with monitor mode in order to log the sort of information, because when you do a basic scan of the devices around you, you get information like Bluetooth devices, access points. Seeing clients and stuff like that might be a little bit different. But if a device is just putting out packets and you're able to read that, it shouldn't be much of a problem to be able to parse and get that information from virtually any smartphone. So the barrier to entry for this sort of surveillance has become substantially less. So now if you have a smartphone, you could be scooping up surveillance data about the people around you. And anybody around you with a smartphone could be doing the same thing. So we typically think about like advanced surveillance being like these like sketchy devices that are like hidden with all these antennas coming out of them. The government operates them from the back of a van. No, it could just be 100 people with cell phones, honestly, like in your area walking around and contributing data to a data broker that's then selling it to the government. So the next time you're mass surveilled, it could just be all the people around you who want to make $5 or whatever.
That's what I was about to say is like, I see the next natural step for this is going to be someone's going to smack a cryptocurrency on it and pay people for that gathering that data. And then that's when you'll have a real beast on your hands.
Yep. Yeah, so this is just such a sketchy business. Like, if you want to read more about it, some of the stuff they do is like locating things and forcing you to go like take a picture of it, record data around it, and that can be used for all sorts of stuff. Again, I think this is an absolutely fascinating story of how surveillance is creeping into everyday life and how normal devices, when enough people are using them for a purpose you might not intend, can be used as advanced surveillance tools, which then can be resold to the government and the military, apparently.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay, I need to interject a positive note.
All right.
Mind you, a quick note. So the FBI seized $2.3 million in Bitcoin from Revil and, did we say Revil or R-Evil?
Revil.
Revil, okay. Revil and Grand Crab. Yeah. So, that's a positive note. I always love seeing the FBI getting some justice on these ransomware groups. For those interested, it was from an Exodus wallet. It's still unclear how exactly the FBI gained access to that wallet. I'm assuming they got the private key somehow.
They probably asked.
Whether that's from a warrant from the company or just like a search warrant of a house, and then they got secret key somehow that way. But yeah, so there. Sorry, I just had to add a positive note off after all that glum.
Okay, all right,
So-
you want something positive? Well, how about this? One of my friends has made this. It's not cybersecurity related, but it is great. Look at this. So they're mannequin arms, and guess what they do? They react to sound.
That's great.
Ready? Ready? Let's do it.
So they're just like party arms? Whoa.
Well, they're a little... Look at them go.
Nice.
I'm sorry. As a maker, I really like all the stuff that Emily does, and this is one of my favorites just because of how intimidating it looks.
Oh my
I
god.
want a pair of these arms for my own house, and I think that this song should be playing when people walk in.
The only thing we need next is like to make them animatronic so they move on
So
their
they
own.
move around. I'm not. That seems like a whole other level. I'm sorry. This just delighted me, and this was probably one of my favorite just maker things I've seen in a while. So Emily, thank you for creating these sound reactive glowing mannequin arms, and thank you for putting them to this song. I think I had a dream about this. All right. Let's move on. So, one thing that I've been working on is CircuitPython. That's a version of Python that is designed for microcontrollers to make it super easy for beginners to get started controlling hardware. So I've been using the Human Interface Device library for the last week to explore what kind of things you can do using CircuitPython that are like human interface device attack related. So like creating a mouse object and doing a bunch of bad things, creating an auto clicker or creating a mouse jiggler to prevent a computer from locking, or even doing like keystroke attacks like the USB rubber ducky. So I prepared a couple examples. This is one of the worst. So this one is 30 lines of CircuitPython that just makes a computer totally unusable as soon as you plug this in.
Whoa.
And what it will do is it will randomly double click. So you'll just be doing something, just click on stuff. It will ram the mouse into the corner and keep it there for 50 times, so it just bounces the mouse into the corner. So like you can't pull the mouse out for like a good couple seconds.
Yeah.
And then we'll also click down the mouse button and then throw it into the corner, thus highlighting everything on the screen. So if you're in the middle of typing, and it does this, it'll grab the mouse, throw it, grab everything, and then you've just deleted everything you were just typing. Somebody else said that it would be really funny to like press down the mouse button but not release it. So as you're doing stuff, like suddenly the mouse is just selecting everything and you can't like unclick it. That one I think is actually one of the funniest ones, and I'm probably going to implement because I was thinking about it more and I realized how annoying that actually is. But I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who gave me suggestions for the worst thing to do with a mouse. I really appreciate when people contribute. Zam said press the detonation button. I was not able to find that. But I did take these suggestions. Randomly go to the top corner where the X lives and clicks. Done. Keep the left mouse button down constantly. I believe that this is super annoying and can make you believe your computer's trackpad is broken.
Yeah.
So that one I'm probably going to do. And then another one is I can actually use Wi-Fi to determine when someone is close by and make this sort of thing only happen when a specific user is using the computer.
That's really evil.
So basically, like, a bunch of weird stuff would start happening when one person uses the device, but it wouldn't happen to anyone else, and nobody else would believe this person, which I think is very funny.
I was going to say, I wonder how small you could make the microcontroller, because then you could easily embed it in the keyboard itself or in the mouse and make it nigh on impossible to find.
Yeah, absolutely. So I also have, this is something I was working on last night. So everybody knows what the USB rubber ducky is. It's a little keyboard-like device that allows you, well, it's a little thumb drive-like device that pretends to be a keyboard, and when you plug it into your computer, it will inject a bunch of keystrokes. So this is the underlying script for the USB rubber ducky is called Ducky Script, and this has been ported to all sorts of platforms, including Arduino, and now it has been ported to CircuitPython. So thanks to Dave Is You, this project was ported to the Raspberry Pi Pico with the Pi Pico project. Or no, wait, the Pico Duck project, I think it was. Yeah, Pico Ducky project. But porting this to the ESP32S2 was actually super easy. So thank you to Dave for providing great documentation and making it super simple to take your very nice, respectable code and factor it into some very cursed code that I myself am using. So on the Wi-Fi Nugget S2, we managed to make it so you can run any one of 4 different Ducky Script payloads by just plugging this thing in, loading up the payloads, and then pressing whichever button you want to run. So there's a little menu that says payload 1, payload 2, payload 3, payload 4. Technically, I have got a button on the back too, so I could do like a shift and then like add 4 more payloads if I really wanted to.
Well, I was going to say you can do any kind of button combination, like up and down or up and down within a second of each other. Do one like side to side, the left 2, kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, so this is like a pretty basic implementation of like a multi-script Ducky Script style tool. So we can inject Ducky Scripts, and again, you can go on hack5.org and find Ducky Scripts, and you can just load them up, and they should work just fine on this platform, which is so incredibly cool. So if you want to play around with CircuitPython and you have any CircuitPython board that supports human interface devices, then you can go ahead and build your own mouse clicker. You can follow this guide and start using Ducky Scripts on it. I think it is so incredibly cool. And of course, if you want to support our team, you can always pick up one of the ESP32S2 based Wi-Fi nuggets at hackcad.com. Make sure to buy the S2 version, and you can get started making HID devices yourself, which for me, I use Python for basically everything because I suck at math and programming, and Python has never made it an issue. I can still work on my projects knowing as little math and programming as I do, and it just works.
Look, Stack Overflow is always there to help you, too.
Stack Overflow can't even deal with some of the dirty stuff I do with Python, to make stuff work. It's just, you can be not that good at programming and still do a lot of really super cool stuff with hardware using CircuitPython. So CircuitPython is supported by Adafruit. It has a lot of really great active developers adding stuff to it all the time. And if you want to see my first guide on making an HID device, you can check out my latest Hack 5 episode, which is making a mouse jiggler or an auto clicker if you want to farm some resources. Of course, I can't officially condone that, but it's very easy to do. So if you want to see more information about using CircuitPython for HID attacks, check out my Hack 5 video on this mouse jiggler, and ignore all the comments saying, "I know how to do this with Java." Because yeah, for sure you could sit down on someone's computer and type out a mouse jiggler, but the point is that you just plug something in and it does it. But anyway, yeah, so if you got any questions about this, you can feel free to leave them.
A positive comment.
Oh my gosh, I just so I'll teach an attack where you take a device, you plug it in, and it automatically runs the exploit. And people will be like, if I had 5 hours sitting behind that computer, I could type out something too. Or why don't you just open up a YouTube video and have that prevent the computer from locking? It's because you can run this in the background and it's sneaky. And if you have a desktop computer and you plug this in the back, the person should presumably never notice that it's just jiggling the mouse just a little bit at random intervals to keep the computer from locking. The point here is that it's a device where it's subtle, and you could plug it into the back of someone's computer and they might not notice that when they leave, it doesn't lock down, and then you can go around behind them and get free access to it. So these are typically used just to prevent computers from locking down. It still just blows me away that when we do this, and I say that multiple times, we still get comments that are just I learned how to do this with a program called Caffeine 5 years ago. I'm
well, what also gets me is they miss the whole point of it being about the process and learning to use CircuitPython or MicroPython. I forget which one you used in this one. CircuitPython.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love that someone also did a a payload to do this for PowerShell.
Oh, cool.
But it's not. We're not there yet. That's going to be for the next one. So I'm probably actually going to use this to make a HID keyboard that injects a mouse jiggler script, and that way everyone can tell me how great their JavaScript is for doing this or whatever. But yeah, so really, really interesting that you can just get started with one of these cheap little devices. Honestly, the cheapest board I've found is the $4 S2 Mini board, which if you want to get just a bare bones version of this with no screen, like no buttons, nothing, you can just grab that for like $4 and get started making your own mouse jiggler or HID keyboard ejector. So if you like hardware, if you like these sorts of attacks and you want to get started programming your own, and maybe you suck at programming a little bit, CircuitPython is for you. And I am terrible at programming, and I've still had lots of fun over the last couple of weeks designing some extremely cursed things. So if you want to do that too, then definitely check out CircuitPython. It's a lot of fun.
And for those that might not be familiar, what's the difference between a normal D1 Mini and an S2?
Ah, well, wouldn't I love to tell you that? So the D1 Mini, which I happen to have one right here, is a little development board, a little breakout board for the ESP8266 microcontroller. And that's a really cool microcontroller, but it does not support native USB, meaning when you plug this little thing in, you have to communicate with it via command line. It's really not cute. Like a lot of people who are just getting started find it kind of tedious to interact with this microcontroller over the command line. The difference is the ESP32S2, the S2 Mini, is in the same form factor as this D1. So I can just take an S2 and plug it into the same form factor I would use an S2, which is really cool. So they're interchangeable. But the S2 Mini has native USB. So when you plug this thing in, it shows up as a flash drive on your computer, and you can literally drag and drop code onto it. It is as easy as that. So if you don't want to go messing around with command line programs in order to write some Python, and you don't, feel like a degree in computer science is necessary to begin your programming career, this is absolutely for you. You can get it set up, started through the browser, not using any command line tools at all, and then just start dragging and dropping Python code, and it just works. So really, really cool.
Yeah, pretty awesome. We are almost out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, if you want to find out more about CircuitPython also, just stay tuned to Hack Live because we're going to be covering more of it there because, again, I'm just in love with it at the moment. I think it's so incredibly cool. And then, all right, I've got one last thing that I think is kind of cool. So we have a lot of questions about like OSINT and the different ways that you can use OSINT in order to go through a bunch of imagery or like find a particular thing you're looking for. This is the first example I've ever seen of this. So this is a model that was trained to find a particular type of weapon by uploading a 3D model of the weapon. So instead of like training models on like visual images of like this weapon in various places, they literally just uploaded a 3D model and let the computer look through images to try to find something that makes sense in space for this model. So obviously the model, or rather the weapon here is rammed into the concrete and undetonated. So it is pretty tricky to figure out that this has like the rest of the shape underneath it, and that it's like this specific object. But with 86% confidence, this tool was able to go through and identify this very specific weapon based on just uploading a 3D render of it. So pretty incredible that like journalists or other people who are looking for human rights abuses or tracking munitions around the world could use something like this to go through lots and lots and lots and lots of imagery and positively identify very specific weapons or very specific things they're looking for.
Yeah, this is actually called synthetic data training for machine learning, and it's actually increasingly common. Groups like NVIDIA have been using it for training self-driving cars, and it's very common to render these in 3D and then use a platform like Blender, and basically you just put various background images behind it and then rotate the model every which way, because for machine learning you need hundreds or thousands of images. And what's really cool about this type of training is segmentation is a big problem in machine learning, right? So normally to identify that, a human would have had to draw that bounding box around that image and then label it. But when you're using these 3D models, then the model itself is labeled as, in this case, like bomb or whatever, right? So then when it's rotated, it can be precisely segmented. So instead of a box around it, you can see like exactly like the fins and the body and everything. So it's really powerful, and I think you're going to see this a lot more going forward.
Yeah, if you're looking for like a unique shape, I mean, munitions is particularly ideally suited to this. Like people who are tracking munitions are looking for an object that is the same shape, that has similar markings, and like might be a little deformed or partially hidden, But, this is something that it's pretty predictable what that shape is going to look like. So if you are somebody who's looking to track a specific shape, in this case, the shape of a munition all over the world, it runs in your browser with JavaScript. It's so cool that this sort of technology is now available to people who are investigating like this sort of thing. But of course, it's a little creepy because it just means that you can track any sufficiently uniquely shaped object. In visual, like photos or video. So that's a little weird.
Something that's really interesting about that particular too is, thanks to video games, these models are already made. So you don't even need to have any experience. Like if you wanted to track like AKs in videos, right, or something like that, it's trivial to go to some of these websites, buy realistic AK models, 3D models, and then put them in this neural network trainer and train that. I don't know if this specific one does it, but like when you're doing the, synthetic training data sets, video games and various CGI or CG arts have made it where you don't even need to be a modeler yourself to make these neural networks.
Man, I can't wait to upload all of my family photos and find out if there's an RBK 250 hidden in any of them.
No, exactly.
Yeah, so again, this is really incredible technology. The fact that you can do this in your browser is just so super cool. So if you're an OSINT person and you're wondering where like the bleeding edge of OSINT is, it's probably uploading a 3D model of the munition you're looking for and scanning through like hundreds, if not thousands of photos and videos to identify where it exists. Pretty crazy that you can just take an object and start searching for it in the physical space of photos and videos that are just published on the internet. So.
What's going to be even more spooky is as this technology is more increasingly applied to real-time surveillance. So like in countries like China or Great Britain where they have large surveillance networks, they could easily train one of these networks and employ it in real time so that if on any of their public surveillance cameras someone pulls out a gun, it immediately notifies the police or something like that. That's when you get into really... spooky.
Lame false positives.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like deploying banana SWAT team because we can't tell the difference between a pistol and a banana yet, but we're working on it. Yeah, that's going to be lots of fun. Okay, I think that's just about all the time we have for today. I want to thank everyone who was in the chat today. We had some very good suggestions. I think that we did cover most of the stuff people were asking about, like the log to shell vulnerability. So if you have any questions that weren't answered on the stream, make sure to leave them either on my Twitter, on our YouTube channel, or you can even leave them on our Hack 5 videos. We'll check it. And we will answer them on the Tuesday stream where Alex is returning and Michael is returning to the woods to search for more Bigfoot.
It has been pointed out that I have become the thing that I was hunting. I am the rare sight now.
Yeah, you are now the elusive creature that people can barely find.
I'm the cryptozoological monster.
And someone else has said, hello, shot spotter. Yeah, that's the thing with microphones that hears gunshots.
Exactly.
All right. So I think that's all we have time for. Thank you again to everyone in the chat. We'll see you again on Tuesday. If you want to see more great Veronis content, make sure to check out our sometimes co-host Killian on the Veronis brand channel doing the threat update. And we'll see you all next time. Bye.